I don't know. There are just a couple of things where I'm like, that's a hard boundary, that's a hard no. And I'm very, very lucky to have a lot of friends who are not on the internet and kind of can give me a reality check of like, Louie, you shared something with the internet that you haven't even talked about with me. What's going on?
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Going Places. I'm your host, Natalie Byrne. This podcast is aimed to give you clarity on your creativity because you, my friend, are going places. This is a free episode of my Patreon podcast where I sit down with a guest and ask them about their creative journey. Today on the podcast, I am joined by author, illustrator, and my friend Louie, aka Tender Rebellions. They are an artist that makes educational work on feminism, politics, and gender. Their book, Rethinking Gender, first published in German, was released on the 1st of November 2022 in English, which is an educational comic about gender, gender roles, and gender identities, filled with Louie's beautiful and inviting illustrations. This book has 230 pages, which guides the reader through an interactive journey to explore different aspects of gender. We recorded this episode back in spring 22, and I'm so excited to share this episode with you today. This podcast is a complete passion project of mine. If you would like to support the podcast, you can do that through my Patreon for as little as £1 a month. In this episode, we're talking about this beautiful book that Louie has made, along with boundaries and so much more. Let's get into it.
So we are recording at the moment in beautiful spring. It's April. I'm so excited to have Louie here with me. So, huge congratulations first. Well done.
Thank you.
How are you feeling about this book coming out? What are your thoughts and feelings?
Oh gosh. All the feelings. I'm excited. I'm happy. I'm very proud. I'm looking forward to the experience, but I'm also very nervous and slightly terrified because it will reach a whole new audience, of course. And I created it 3 years ago, and feminism moved on since then, and how we talk about gender changed, and I made adjustments to the book, of course, and I worked with a wonderful sensitivity reader during the translation. So we caught some of it, but it's like, I feel like information is getting old really quickly these days. So if you made a book about gender in 2019 and it's coming out in 2022, like end of 2022, there will be something in, like there are mistakes in it. There is stuff in it where I'm sure people will be like, this could have been better. So I'm also very nervous about that, but then it goes back to being very proud and excited. But right now it's April, so it's mostly the excitement about the process still ahead of me. I don't know what it's going to be like in November. I think mostly happiness. Right now I'm freaking myself out. It will be a lot of good feelings.
I imagine you've got as well like a long list of things to do until November.
Oh yes. We're talking to you. one thing.
Loads of press.
No, we are actually putting together an influencer campaign. Like we talked with the press marketing team from MIT Press. We talked about all the people I want to work with. We're going to work with different independent bookshops. So for the UK, for example, it's the Feminist Bookshop in Brighton, and the first 100 people who get the copy of the book at that bookshop, either online or in person, get a signed copy. Stuff like that needs to happen right now. Right now, as we're talking, the first print samples are on their way to me, so I can check the colors. And it's like, it's exciting.
It's all happening.
It's all happening. Yeah.
I'd love to know more about the sensitivity reader that you mentioned. How was that process like?
That's been amazing. It's been such a massive help. Just because when we started the whole process, MIT Press approached my German publisher and were like, we want to do this book. And then they approached me and were like, we checked out your online presence and your English is good enough. And the tone of the book is very conversational. So do you want to translate it yourself? So, well, kind of, yeah. But then I talked to my editor, Matt, and let him know, like, I don't know enough about the discourse that's going on in the US or even in the UK. And I imagine things are different. Like just how you talk about stuff. German is a very strange language sometimes. And Matt was like, yeah, I get that. But also he wasn't really sure if he had the expertise. He's just, he's an editor in a publishing house that covers all sorts of topics. So we then started talking about having a sensitivity reader. So somebody who is an expert in the field. And we brought them on and had somebody proofread the whole thing. And it's been amazing because that person speaks English and German. So they were able to compare, like go back to the German version and be like, oh, I see what you meant. And then go into the English version and be like, yeah, maybe rephrase that and maybe do this or that. And they also caught like 2 illustrations that were in the book that were not problematic in itself. Like if you see it in the book, it makes sense. For example, there was one illustration throughout the book, there's this protagonist talking you through the things, me. And that protagonist has a cat, and the cat always asks like the stupid questions, the ones you maybe shouldn't be asking. And there's one illustration of the cat dressed up as a mouse, being like, who am I? What am I even doing? And in the context of the chapter, that made sense and was funny and was cute. And the sensitivity reader came back to me and was like, imagine somebody took that, just a screenshot of that, and posted it on Twitter with the sentence, Louie is a TERF. People would not check like that. Just taking that illustration and saying that's how Louie portrays gender is like a very trans thing if you take it out of the book. And I was like, you know what I mean by when I say I'm slightly terrified. But yeah, that was really cool to have somebody look from a completely different perspective.
I'd love to go back and ask you more about that, maybe towards the end. I want to first ask you about how the idea first came to you when you thought of making this book, and when did you know that you had to make this book?
I'm not sure there was a specific moment. It's my, like the German version is my second book, and the first book was a sex education comic for young people with vulvas. And that's how I wrote it in the book. Like, this is a book for young people with vulvas. And when I was making that, I knew I didn't want to go into gender within that book, the first one, the sex ed comic. But I realized like, oh, I probably need to explain why I keep saying young people with vulvas. And also some people from like readers or like people in audiences when I had readings asked me like, what's up with that? So like there always was that sense of I want to explore gender as a topic, and I want to make more educational comics. So I kind of want to make the book. And the first one was just received so well that my German publisher immediately came back to me and was like, hey, you want to do a second book? And I'm like, sure. So there wasn't really a moment where I decided I'm just now going to sit down and do it. It just was a snowball it was already rolling. I was like, okay, let's just run with it. Yeah, it wasn't really that much of a decision. It was more like I have the chance to do it. I have an opportunity to do it and I want to do it. So let's go.
And this topic is it's almost like it needs a book because there's so much to talk about, rather than like, because some people ask me like, how do you know something's a book rather than something else? And it's usually that you've got so much information and you need to, what's the word? you need to go in depth. And I think it's so wonderful with a book to be able to have that time to like absorb all the information. You've mentioned to me before how personal this book is to you, and how connected it is to you and your own journey with gender. I wanted to ask you how you feel about doing personal work. How are your boundaries? Like, do you have boundaries set in place to protect yourself?
I do. The funny thing about the book is the process was really, really personal for me. Like when I started working on it, I was still using a different name, and like only a couple of weeks before the book went into print, I went to my publisher and was like, by the way, I'm non-binary, I'm changing my name. But it's not in the book. Like in the book, other people with different gender identities are interviewed and their points of views are in there, but my point of view or like my personal experience isn't even in the book. I am currently thinking about doing a book specifically about my experience and coming more from that point of view, but so far I've been very, very strict with not talking too much about that online, because I don't think that queer people owe that to anybody. Like, my coming out story wasn't always easy. So I'm like, I kind of want to work through that for myself for a bit. And I don't know, I sometimes hear people saying like, oh, if you need to share that because then other people will learn from it and not respond in the same unhelpful ways, or, just learn from the mistakes other people have done. And I'm like, yeah, but no. I want people to believe that queer phobia is still a thing and that coming out is still hard without having to share my trauma with the world. So that I don't know, I just have to hope that people will learn from it. I find it interesting because I'm constantly kind of reevaluating my boundaries. Like back in 2019, when I was going through the process of changing my name and coming out to my friends, it was completely out of the question to make that public because it just was my process. Right now that changed, but there are a couple of things that are just hard boundaries for me that probably will never change. For example, I don't talk publicly about my family because that's nobody's business. And I don't know, there are just a couple of things where I'm like, that's a hard boundary, that's a hard no. And then there are boundaries where I'm like, I have to check in with myself. I do a lot of journaling, a lot of like self-reflection journaling. And I'm very, very lucky to have a lot of friends who are not on the internet and kind of can give me a reality check of like, Louie, you shared something with the internet that you haven't even talked about with me. What's going on?
Yeah, and it's so clear as well that your personal journey has informed your art practice. But I think I love talking about boundaries with you because I think you're really good at having those boundaries, but you're a great example of how you can still follow your own passions and interests and like your personal journey, bring that into your artwork while also having those like, I'm not going to talk about these things, I'm not going to talk about that, and I'm not going to share this on the internet before I speak to about it with a friend first, or I'm going to process this thing and then maybe in a few more years I'll make artwork about it. And I love that because I really struggled, I think, not thinking about those things, and so I've learned a lot from you in that sense. And I think it's so important as well I think personal work is like personal journeys and sharing them in different ways also need to be highlighted. I don't think they just has to be like, I'm going through this thing right now and blah, 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 blah. It can be like a slow process, and like you can feel really attached to something that you make because it involves your personal journey, while also like in your book, you said you haven't included your own things. Yeah, really inspiring and such an interesting topic, I think, where as more people are trying to make work about things that are important to them. But also like it comes back to the discussion on like how feminism and all these things are changing over time, because people are sharing their are sharing their like journey or artwork and or thoughts on things. It's like a mixture, isn't it? It's like I want to fight for these things that are important to me and my friends, while also keeping reserving some of that private life. And you mentioned about journaling. How important is like writing for you? What's your writing process like?
Do you mean for the book or for me personally?
Any kind of writing. Do you journal? I'd love to ask you more about like journaling and, and that kind of stuff.
Well, I journal every single day.
Oh,
I'm one of those people. I'm one of those annoying people.
I've completely fallen off. I've fallen off. So inspire me. What's your practice with journaling?
I do it in the morning. So every single morning, I wake up. I give breakfast to my cat. I make a coffee, and then I go back to bed and cuddle up with, like, the cat is by then done with breakfast and comes and cuddles and purrs, and it's very cute. Oh. And I have my first cup of coffee and just journal for about half an hour. And I don't tell myself like, oh, you have to journal for 3 pages, or you're not allowed to look at your phone, or like I don't do well if it's so restricted. I'm just like, I know I need time in the morning to wake up anyway, so I'm just gonna brain vomit onto the page. So that's like one thing that I do every single day, and it helps me to stay calm, be less stressed, be happier, and also kind of catch negative feelings when I'm like journaling and I notice, oh, I'm grumpy, then I can journal about what's making you feel grumpy today. So that's my daily thing. Then I do a Sunday reflection. That's a new thing I do since January, and it's been so helpful, so good. Every Sunday I sit down, and that's a lie, not every Sunday. I've not been good in March, but I try to sit down every Sunday and first like list my highlights of the week. Like, I went for a really nice walk, or I was vulnerable with a friend, or I finished a commission and the client loved it. Like, different, like, can be all sorts of stuff. Then I check in with like, what are you maybe avoiding and why? And that's been really, really helpful. Sometimes I notice on a Tuesday, hey, you're avoiding to deal with this, and on Sunday you will have to write it down. So maybe do it now so you don't have to write it down.
You're really good at things like this. Okay, I need to do this. I really need to do this.
Yeah, and like, just like a weekly check-in with my goals. And when there's something going on and I notice like, oh, I'm currently struggling with this, then I just have a journaling session to sort it out for myself.
I love that. And I love that because I feel like sometimes I'm like, I just need to get a bit quiet and I'll know what the answer is or something. When you're writing for a project like your books, what's that process like? Does it come from journaling or is it from somewhere else?
I think it comes from journaling in parts, but also it's completely different, because for the book, the first step was to research, and I compiled this massive document of like all the information that needs to go into it. And in the book, there are different types of texts. There are these very informational, educational, here's something you need to know. And then there are speech bubbles, which are more like, hey, so here are my opinions. And that, I think that speech bubble stuff is coming from journaling more. And then in the book, there's also interviews. So that was obviously not my personal writing. That was other people talking. And then me having to edit what they sent me, meaning, okay, I only have space for 3 sentences and you sent me 30. So cool. So it's like with journaling, I feel like it's much more for me, and I don't care if I like, what are the words, is it grammatically correct, are there typos? Yeah, I don't really care. And with the book, obviously you have to care and you have to like edit much more. With some projects I'm working on right now, it come like right now I'm working on a fiction project, and that comes more from journaling, I think, more from being connected with feelings and memories and writing that down. But also with that project, there's more planning upfront. Like I think the difference is, for me, with journaling, I'm writing to find something out. And with books, I found something out and I want to write it down so others can know about it. Does that make sense?
Yes. There's a nice definition between those things as well. Like how you said as well, journaling is just for you. Comes back to how great you are with boundaries. Okay, so I have another question that is about writing. How important is it to you who is writing, and with what point of view, especially when it comes to books on social issues or people talking about issues?
So important. So important. I don't think that non-queer people can't say any smart things about queerness. Probably they can. Maybe there's a non-queer person out there who is great at writing about queer issues. I don't know. I also wouldn't read it personally, just because, I don't know, I think feminism fights, or social justice movement in general, fight so much for marginalized groups being heard. So why would I sit down and read a book about racism by a white person, for example? It just doesn't make sense to me. I think we still need stuff like that. I think there are, to stick with that example, I think there are white people out there who will take that information much better from another white person, or maybe another white person should do it to deal with all the hatred coming from it. But also, once you reached a certain point of being like, oh, we have a social issue here and we need to educate ourselves and we need to listen to that group, then we need books from the group to, like, you know. And I find that very, very hard, because I obviously don't speak for the whole queer community. I'm just one person. Nobody elected me to be the spokesperson. Just, you know, just one person at a desk who decided to make a book. And now people are telling me like, oh, I gave your book to my mom and now she understands queer issues. Like, a lot of younger queers message me like that, and being like, I gave it to my parents and then I came out as trans and we still have we had a conversation because of it. So that's a lot of responsibility that I feel that I have. But yeah, also maybe a person who isn't from the community and who didn't have, like, how do I say it? Probably a non-queer person would also feel responsible, but maybe not in the same way. Like, you know, you just have a different connection to your own community, and I want all the trans kids, for example, to do so well. I want them to feel so happy and loved. And I'm not saying that cis people can't feel that way. I just think it's different. I can't explain it properly.
Yeah, and success as well as these issues come to the forefront and money's going into them in whatever way. It should be those people from the marginalized groups that get the paycheck.
True.
that are you know, at the front of all these issues as well. So yeah, and I know that you said that that you were trying to make a book for your own community. And I just think that that's, I don't know, when we were talking the other day and you were telling me about that, I was just thinking it was so beautiful, because that's why it's important that someone with the experiences of the community write for their own community. So what was the process like in 2019 when you were first putting the book together, or the idea was like coming together?
Well, the idea was there, and then I immediately had a structure in mind because, well, when we talk about gender, I think we're at a point where everybody knows, like, okay, we have sex, we have gender roles, and we have gender expression, we have like coming out experiences and queer gender identities. So that was already like, okay, I've got some chapters, cool. Next step was research. I just read a lot. It was also nice, just having an excuse to read about a topic that interests me. Then I
It's
just
so
sat down
important though. Yeah, it's such a
yeah.
something I wanted to ask you, because that is, for me, I research a lot as well, and it's really important, and it shows through your work as well.
Thank you. Yeah, the next step for me was to write a first draft. With books, I always write first and illustrate second, which I find interesting because usually my process is the other way around, and I first have an illustration in mind, and I don't know, it goes together in a different way. But yeah, I wrote a first draft. Then I realized I can't do this by myself. It can't just be me. So I started researching, like looking for people who would be willing to share their experiences with gender with me. And I went on Instagram, but also on Tumblr, which I didn't even realize was still a thing. And was just looking through the hashtags of, like, for example, asexual or apora, no, not asexual, I'm so sorry. Sexual orientations are not in the book. Agender, apora gender, maverick, whatever. And looked for people who were blogging about their own experiences and messaged them, was like, hey, I'm working on a book. Would you be willing to answer these 3 questions for me? And in return, you get an illustration of yourself. Would that be cool? And a lot of people were very cool with that. And so I got a lot of replies. And then the process started of putting all the words that I had into illustrations. Yeah. And then kind of we're slowly coming together.
Oh, that's so cool that you were like, okay, I need to include other people's experiences and found them. And that also you were writing first, and then you completed that, and then you almost like switched out your hats from like research mode to like writing.
I think doing books, you wear a lot of different hats. I have the researcher hat and the writer hat and the illustrator hat and the interviewer hat and the marketing hat and the editing hat, and it's a lot of hats. Sometimes I don't like it. Just imagine both of us with a whole thing with hats on top of each other.
Big hats, very big hats.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's so interesting because it's almost like once you know what you have to say and you've written it, I can just imagine you being like, okay, so now I need to add, because that's how I worked for Period. I had written it. And so it's good to be like the words almost like inspired then your art. Do you have like a favorite spread in the book, a favorite page in the book?
Oh, it changes a lot. There is one page, like there's a whole section in the book about masculinity and about like toxic masculinity and fragile masculinity, and how men are also affected by gender roles, and why it's important that we also talk about masculinity, and like why feminism is not anti-men. And there's one illustration with this guy in a flower crown, and I kind of like it because he looks like your stereotypical straight dude, like, oh, I'm just such a muscular cool guy with a beard, and then he has this really pastel pink flower crown. Oh, I love it.
Oh,
I think that's a favorite right now. Also everything where the cat is in. I just love drawing cats. Makes me happy.
Oh, that's so cute. And I love the idea of like bringing in humor in like using the cat to kind of ask the silly questions, because sometimes it's funny being a creative as well and asking questions about creativity, because sometimes things just happen and then you're like, oh, this works. Was that like a thought process of like, I want to discuss maybe silly questions? How can I do that? Or was it like
at first I had the asshole character, because no one else to name it.
Character. I want to see that draft. Is it just me? Is it just me asking questions?
It's actually based on a guy that I knew back then, and he he was a bit slightly problematic whenever we talked about gender, and he made very inappropriate jokes, and I didn't find it very funny. So I was like, okay, I kind of need to hear somebody that I need to show, like people have these questions and people respond to these topics with those jokes. And I mean, I named him the asshole character, but I also was friends with him. I know he's a good person. I know he really tried the best. It wasn't very good, but he tried. And I just think somebody, not me, obviously, I wasn't a good match, but somebody needed to talk to him in a way that he felt, I don't know, that the other person would take him seriously. So my hope kind of is that somebody, for example, I said earlier, like young queers often give that book to their parents or godparents, is that a word? I don't know, to other people, non-queer people. And my hope is that they don't feel attacked when I say, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be saying this. Maybe this isn't a question that's appropriate. And I first had the asshole character, and I was like, probably people will feel attacked when they see a similarity between themselves and that guy that I drew. So I changed it and turned it into my cat, because my cat sometimes is very stupid. So that's the whole thought process.
Well, that's really clever, I think. I think sometimes maybe things that we think are just like, I don't know, they just happen. But I think that that's really clever, because it's always a thing I'm thinking about, and I'm sure loads of people that are artists trying to make work on like very political issues is how, and this is why artwork is so beautiful, to talk about difficult things and bringing that, okay, how can I bring maybe humor and fun illustrations, and your illustrations are so like warm and friendly, combine it with this topic that often has been very like difficult or to talk about. And I think that's why this book is going to be so amazing, because it will bring those two things together. And I think it's inviting, and especially if in terms of like an interactive book, it's like now that adds another element of like, now you're coming along and on the journey. I think that's really fun. And I think as well with the cat, I think it does bring, especially with humor or like artwork, I think it breaks like the boundaries down so that we can talk about difficult things. Like if we can have like a giggle or a laugh, or see like a cute cat being silly. And I think that's why, I think that's why artwork is so, or humor is so, can be such a great tool to talk about difficult things. How do you feel about that?
Same. Comics in general are absolutely great. I have a lot of nerdy knowledge about this because I wrote my thesis about it. But comics are a really, really amazing tool to make topics less scary. Like if you thought about, like if you are a person who never ever thought about gender before and now want to read a book about gender for the first time, are you going to read the non-fiction book that's very sciencey, pages and pages full of texts, and you're like, oh, that's a lot? Or are you gonna take a book that's, oh, it has some pictures in it, I don't need to, it doesn't seem that hard to read it. So it's, it breaks down some barriers of like how easy is it to approach that topic. And also having a character that kind of guides you through something can help, because then the person who is reading is feeling like, hey, I'm actually talking to somebody. A great example for that is A Quick and Easy Guide to Sex and Disability. It's a really, really cool book where the author and main character talks to the readers about what it's like to have sex when you're a disabled person. And I don't know, when I read that, I was so engaged, and I was like, oh, I feel like I'm having a very emotional discussion with a friend just because I saw somebody with speech bubbles talking to me. Yep, that was, I don't know, it's just a different approach to learning and to teaching. And obviously it won't work for everybody, but it doesn't have to. And I don't know, for me it works. I find things way less scary when I can look at cute pictures.
Absolutely, I'm the same, and I have dyslexia as well, so I think that that's a big thing that we need more of with education. In terms of like thinking about like everything you said, when it comes to writing the book, did you have anyone in mind that you were like writing for?
I think maybe my younger self, to some extent. It wasn't like I'm sitting down and I'm writing this for my younger self. It's just something that I maybe realized later on, looking back on it now. But yeah, the experience many young queer people have now, where they can look at the book and be like, yep, this is how I feel. I feel seen. I feel like this book really explains what I'm going through right now, or explains like the whole context of gender, and then go and give that book to their parents, and the parents being like, oh, I'm reading a book, that's cool. I feel very like, you know, I think to parents, reading a book feels more serious or more like valid than seeing, I don't know, non-binary representation on Netflix. So if you have a book and you can be like, oh, okay, that's information that I needed, that's something I really, really wanted. And to hear that it's working, just every time somebody messages me and is like, hello, I gave your book to my mum and then we cried and we love each other so much and I wanted to say thank you, I just cry. I break down in tears. It's so nice.
There is, I got goosebumps, and I know that you said that earlier. That is so, I mean, does that make you feel like this is why I do this kind of work?
Yeah. And it's also so nice because doing this work is so, I mean, you notice it's so lonely and so isolated sometimes. And
I was like, I know what? Yes, I know loneliness.
Like, you make a book, you sit at your desk in the exact same spot without anybody else around you for weeks and weeks and weeks, because making a book takes a long time. And then you send the book out in the world, and the book came out in 2020. I had one reading. That was the last thing I did before going into lockdown, was to have my book launched. So usually with readings, you get some feedback and some interaction, but with this book, I just sent it out into the world, and I know that people bought it and people read it, but I never heard from them. So having these people, you know, it's just lacking that interaction. Having somebody come into my inbox and be like, this really helped me, that's just magical. And cute. Nice.
It is magical. It is magical because you do just think, I mean, I remember when I was making Period, I was like, if this just helps one person, like it will just be so worth it. And it was a very long project, and you're going back to a long project and spending more time on it. And so, yeah, I think it's like a full circle moment, and I can't wait to speak to you when you're getting so many messages of people in English reading it. Okay, so what do you hope that this book achieves when it comes out?
I mean, can I dream? Can I be completely unrealistically dreamy?
Oh yes, we can enter into the sky's the limit.
The sky's the limit. Well, then I hope that because the publisher is US based, it's also coming out in the UK, and both countries, US and UK, right now have some horrible anti-trans legislation going. And if I can be super daydreamy about it, I'm just gonna hope that people will pick it up. It will become a domino effect where people give it to their co-workers or their grandparents or something, and it actually can change some people's perspective and be like, oh, now I get it. This is gender. Cool. Maybe let's not have conversion therapy, and maybe let's not out trans kids to their parents, and maybe stop the don't say gay bill, and maybe let's just be a bit more chill, a bit more cool. I mean, if it can just be a small puzzle piece on the way to a more queer friendly legislation, that would be amazing. But yeah, that's obviously dreaming big. If it just helps a couple of queer kids and their families to have some tools to talk about gender, I'm totally fine with that. That would also be really cool. That's maybe a more realistic goal, but changing the world, of course, obviously, that's, I mean, that's why we're doing this, isn't it?
Yeah. That's the hope. I mean, the question, it was like there's hope in there in that question, and I think hope is a powerful tool that all activists and anyone who wants to talk about difficult things, we need hope. We can't do the work without hope. And
I think some people are just driven by anger. I mean, from what I see other people doing, I think you can make that work. I think you can grow an audience and publish a book based on being really, really angry, which I get. I'm also sometimes very, very angry. It's just not how I want to approach it.
It's also, as I've definitely been angry before, but it's also unsustainable. It's just like, but easy to burn out, and I think that's why I've been looking at more hopeful things. I think there's a couple of books as well on hope that are really interesting, but yeah, I think I fully back everything that you said, and I really feel like this book can really go there, and I think that's why it's so important for us to talk about it, and then, like you said, like talk about the book and send it out to friends, like people who will need it. And I think that's so, in like when you said to help people have conversations about gender, I think those families and those circles, that's just kind of the first block, isn't it? And then you get to see like, okay, and actually legislation is really important. And I think sometimes a book, or sometimes the information and just a conversation with a friend, can spark those things and can lead someone down a route where they end up at a protest. So I think that's why, like, I love that you said it's like the little building those missing pieces in the puzzle, and it starts with conversations, it starts with education, and it starts with projects like this coming into a book. So we're really, really excited to have it out. Oh my god, it's going to be out when this episode's out.
Gosh, I can't even picture it at this moment. It's gonna be hardcover as well. The German version just as paperback, and I'm like, that is so cool.
So I can just throw it at TERFs and
that's the whole reason I made it, so you can use it to throw at TERFs.
Perfect. Just what we needed. Okay, I think I have some quick fire questions to just ask you about creativity. This podcast is called Going Places, for aspiring creatives who want to aspire to have a creative, what am I saying? This podcast is called Going Places for people who are aspiring creatives. And so I'm going to ask you a quick fire round full of questions on creativity. So how do you stay inspired?
I don't. No, seriously, I don't. And I also don't think that's that this whole idea of the creative genius who's inspired all of the time exists. Maybe they do. I have never met any creative who says I'm inspired 100%. I just go with the flow, and I think I'm just very well prepared. I love organization. I'm a very organized person. I have a notebook that's called my parking lot for ideas. So whenever I have more ideas than I have time, I just park them and put them in my notebook and write them down. It can be ideas for books, but also very small stuff like, hey, let's do an Instagram post about this one thing. Or I don't know, a stick figure trying to tell me 3 months later, you had this idea for this visual. So when a time comes, which there will always be times where I don't feel creative and I don't feel inspired, I can go to that notebook and flick through it and look at like which idea is currently speaking to me, and then I can work on that. And usually when I start working on an idea and take that out of my parking lot, the inspiration just comes back. So I'm like, I prepare for phases where I don't have new ideas.
I use, well, when I used to journal, I'm going to get back into journaling, but I have so many notebooks that are full when I'm not feeling like I'm not gelling with anything. I just go back into an old sketchbook. Can I ask you questions about organization? I don't think you mentioned a few times, but for someone who is, okay, someone comes to you and they're like, I'm a creative person. This is me right now. I'm just being honest. This is actually me. It's not a friend. It's me. I'm really unorganized, and my brain is like, oh, for the podcast listeners, my hands are like all over the place. My brain is just like all over the place. I struggle with organization. What is the best tip that you could give someone like me who's quite disorganized?
Pick a system and stick with it.
Okay.
I think, because I think it's very easy to get lost in like, oh, there are these different types of planning methods, and there are these different, you can do a digital planner, or you could use one as a book, or you could use this app, or you could do all of them. Just, pick one and then just stick with it, because it's like there isn't one method that's perfect and working for everybody. I don't know, I use a paper planner, and I make a weekly to-do list, and then in the mornings I make my daily, these are my goals. I know that for some people that's way too restrictive, and they want to be like, oh, I need to decide every single minute what's coming next, and that wouldn't work for them. So I find it really hard to give organization tips, because I know how my brain works, but also I know that I'm neurotypical, for example. So for somebody with ADHD, my approach to organization probably isn't working. So I'm like, I don't really know. I think figuring out what works for you, and then just gonna stick with that system and not overthinking, and not spend all your organization energy into different organization systems, if that makes sense.
That's so true, because every time I do anything, I'm like, is this the best way of organizing this list? And I will think about that. Then I'll like move things around. I'll be like, wait, I haven't actually started on this list. So you're so right.
It never be the best way. I have so many lists. I just use like old envelopes that I got letters in for lists or something, so I don't feel precious about it. I just, it's going into the trash anyway. So I'm like, I'm going to use a piece of paper that's going into the trash for my list. And by doing that, I'm like, yeah, I'm not getting precious about how my list is organized. It's just a list.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to pick a system. I'm going to stick to the system. Stick to the system I have. How do you avoid burnout?
Not well. Sorry, I feel like this isn't helping.
No, it's honest, and we like honesty.
Well, I try to take weekends off, but I haven't taken a single weekend off in weeks. So yeah, I try to say I'm only working at my desk, and I don't work after 8 p.m. and I don't work in my bed, for example, which I have failed at repeatedly for the past couple of weeks. I honestly don't know. I'm just very lucky that right now I don't have burnout. I mean, a couple of things that are helping me are to have kind of self-care dates for myself, where I just plan, you will go into a forest for a day and you will go on a hike. And having friends who check in with me also helps. To like, hey, we haven't heard from you in 2 weeks. Are you just working all the time? And just having a lot of friendship dates helps, because when you meet somebody, like I don't work when I'm meeting people, and I don't know if other illustrators do that. Just having social events planned prevents me from working all the time.
Yeah, it's that accountability of like, well, I've committed to this,
Yeah.
and so I have to have this finished by that time.
Yeah, and like what I did do last year was to put in some effort on finding hobbies that I can't monetize.
Yeah, you did like pottery and stuff, didn't you?
Oh, but I'm monetizing pottery. The hobbies that I found that I can't monetize or don't want to monetize are playing the piano, reading fiction books, because non-fiction I always can turn into an informational thing on Instagram, and going for walks. These are the 3 things that I'm trying to do, like one of them every day, even if it's just for and learning French, learning
Oh,
languages.
bonjour.
Salut, ça va?
Scheiße. Wait,
What?
that's German.
Yeah, wrong language. I mean, we can also talk German.
I only know je m'appelle Natalie, j'habite d'Angleterre. J'ai fromage.
You have cheese?
J'ai tam fromage. I don't know.
Cool.
Sorry, that's my pathetic French.
That's fine. Yeah, I think that's my biggest advice: finding hobbies that you can't monetize, that have nothing to do with your career.
I love that, and that's something that I think is so important as well, when you make your hobby your full-time career. And like, it's easy to be like, because I know that you love what you do and you love drawing, and I feel the same. I love drawing, and it's so important to find those things that I'm just going to do this just for fun, so that once you make your passion your full-time thing, it's like, okay, what is my fun thing now? And I think that can be a difficult thing to find, but yeah, really important, I think, to avoid burnout. I've been crocheting.
Nice.
And how do you manage your mental health as an artist?
I mean, you mentioned before that I'm good with boundaries, and I think that is true to some extent. Yeah, I think I'm good with boundaries. I'm also good with routines. I mean, I think I know myself quite well at this point. So I know what I need to put into my morning and evening self-care routines to make sure that I'm okay. Like it's kind of similar to making sure that you're physically healthy, where you, with physical health, maybe it's a bit more straightforward, where it's easier to know what your body needs to feel good, and with your mind you need to figure it out first. And I know that journaling is something that my mind just needs. If I don't give my mind the journaling thing, then it's just going to go crazy. And having this information about myself really helps. And then just making sure that I stick to my routine.
What do you do in the evening?
I try to go for a walk. So I try to end my workday. I mean, like, okay, to mentally, because I work from home, to have that separation of like, now I'm in my apartment working, and now I'm in my apartment not working. That's something I started during lockdown. I actually, even in the mornings, I packed my bag, like packing up my laptop into my backpack, walking one time around the street, just like 10 minutes, coming back home, meaning now I'm in the office. And then the same thing in the evening, where I just pack my bag, take everything with me, and go for a small walk. I mean, like, now you're coming home. Now you're going home from work. So having a walk, playing a piano for a bit, having dinner, reading, writing a gratitude list, and then just doing whatever the fuck I want. Like that's also part of my evening routine. It's like I felt really guilty for a while for like every other illustrator. I love Animal Crossing and Stardew Valley and like playing on the Switch. I feel like it's very cliche, but who cares? And for some time I felt really guilty for doing that because I could be working right now and instead I'm playing Animal Crossing. What the hell? What am I doing? I'm wasting my time. No, it's now part of my evening routine to waste some time.
Oh, I love that. And I haven't played Animal Crossing. I need to. It sounds so up my street. But thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming onto the podcast. It was lovely to chat to you. And congratulations on this amazing book. I'm so happy to see it come to a different audience and to see this amazing book coming to new people. And yeah, all the links to get the book will be in the description of this podcast. Where can we find you as well on the internet?
Mostly on Instagram with Tender Rebellion. Oh no, that's not true. It's November now. On Instagram with Tender Rebellions, but also on YouTube now. Yay! Again with Tender Rebellions.
Well, yeah. all your links for socials will be in the description. The links to the book will be in the description. Okay, perfect. We'll end it there. Cool. Perfect.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and thank you so much to my wonderful guest. You can support this podcast on my Patreon. All the links will be in the description.